All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for starting a few minutes late. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but ready to get started now. I'll be brief. My name is Michael Matthews, and I'm the Legislative Director for the Community Economic and Workforce Development Portfolio here at NACo. Thank you all again for joining us for today's webinar, where we're joined by senior officials from the White House Offices of Intergovernmental Affairs and Legislative Affairs, as well as the National Economic Council, who graciously agreed to provide us an update on the Bipartisan Innovation Act, including the provisions that are critical for counties, and to also discuss the importance of regional technology hubs. Before introducing today's guests, I just want to provide you with a few quick reminders. First, we ask that you check your microphone to make sure you're muted and remain so throughout the duration of this presentation. There will be an opportunity for Q&A after the speakers present today. You may also use the Q&A and chat features at any point throughout today's webinar to queue up any questions that you may have for our presenters. Today's webinar, as you guys heard, will be also recorded and made available on our events and education page on our website for future playback. With that, let's go ahead and get started with today's program. Like I mentioned earlier, we're so fortunate to be joined today by Senior Advisor for the White House's Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, Luke McGowan, Deputy Director of the National Economic Council, Sameera Fazil, and Christopher Slevin, who is the Deputy Director for the White House's Office of Legislative Affairs, for this key update on the Bipartisan Innovation Act, which, to alleviate any confusion, also goes by the America Competes Act and the United States Innovation and Competition Act, or USICA, among other names. I want to quickly take a step back to provide some brief context of why Congress and the administration believe this legislation is critical to get done, which I'm sure our guests will go into much more detail on shortly, and also what the bill generally entails. I think the recent urgency is largely in recognition that our global competitors like China have been closing the gap with the United States for decades, building their economies, attempting to take over the manufacturing industry, funding innovation, and producing the products that keep technology running around the world. I think the Department of Commerce in their most recent strategic plan said it best. Innovation, economic security, and national security are all deeply connected and all rely on a resilient domestic industrial base, an effective innovation ecosystem, and a strategic global engagement. It went on to say, to improve US businesses' ability to compete abroad, the nation needs to improve its capabilities at home. Understanding this, the goal of the bipartisan legislation is to strengthen US technological leadership, fortify the US economy and national security by increasing domestic manufacturing, bolstering supply chain resiliency, and addressing bottlenecks in key areas like semiconductors in order to better compete globally in the 21st century economy. Although counties are not usually considered one of the central actors in this space, they have a vested interest in ensuring local businesses are connected to the global economy and more generally the economic prosperity of their community. Whether it's evaluating their current infrastructure needs and focusing future development on a way that fosters an environment conducive to increasing economic activity, forming regional partnerships with other counties and municipalities to leverage resources, build scale, and better promote their region as a hub of international business, playing an intermediary role between the business community and the appropriate federal and state agencies to help economies diversify and expand into new markets, or through their work on the local workforce boards, ensuring that we have the skilled workforce to perform these new roles. Many counties are already augmenting their traditional economic development strategies with a more global focus. And there are provisions within this legislation that will further strengthen counties' abilities to do so, which our guests again will get into, but I wanted to highlight two specific ones that NACo supports. First being the Recompete Act pilot program, which would provide distressed local labor markets, local communities, and tribal governments, this includes counties, with flexible 10-year recompete grants to invest in a variety of local economic development needs and to also increase employment rates. Grants could be used for infrastructure investments, brownfield redevelopment, workforce development, small business assistance, resources to connect residents to opportunities, and other investments to help communities rebuild. The other provision I wanted to highlight before introducing our first guest was the Supply Chain Resiliency subtitle in America Competes. This would authorize $45 billion for grants, loans, and loan guarantees, which counties are eligible for activities that support supply chain resiliency and manufacturing. This includes investments into critical infrastructure or to provide financial incentives to onshore manufacturing facilities out of countries of concern. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first guest speaker today, Luke McGowan. Luke is a senior advisor for like I mentioned earlier, is senior advisor for White House's Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. In this role, among many other things, Luke is tasked with leading the economic recovery efforts with state and local governments. Prior to joining the White House, he served as the director of the Community and Economic Development Office in the city of Burlington, Vermont. Luke, thank you again for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that introduction. And thank you to NACo for, as always, helping to facilitate these conversations with counties. Thank you to all of you who have joined today for this important discussion. I'll be super brief because we're interested to hear from the experts here on the line. But I just want to reiterate what Mike said. We know that counties are on the front lines of so much, not just creating prosperous communities, as we're here to talk about today, but when it comes to COVID or responding to its economic impacts, we've really valued our partnership with counties to get the job done. And I especially want to note seeing how counties play a role working between states and cities and municipalities when it comes to regional conversations. It's clear how critical county leaders are in making regional hubs a success. So with that, I will turn it straight over. I think we'll have time for a little discussion at the end, but to hear broadly what's happening on the BIA and other economic issues, I'm going to turn it to Sameera Fazil, who's the Deputy Director, the National Economic Council, and on her second tour with the NEC. So Sameera, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Luke. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I want to have a chance to talk to you about why we think this bill is so important. It's important not just for advancing U.S. economic competitiveness, like Mike laid out, but also for really strengthening our national security, as those two are more intertwined in today's world, which I think has really been underscored by the recent events in Russia with Putin's invasion of Ukraine. We've seen first with the COVID pandemic and now with Putin's war of aggression that events overseas have the ability to destabilize the U.S. economy and throw off our economic growth and really cost families and hurt families. And legislation like this is going to help us get ahead of that. It's going to help us get ahead of that in a number of ways. First, the legislation is going to really do a lot to restore American technological leadership, especially in technologies that are really foundational to the industries of the future. It will do that by strengthening and expanding the National Science Foundation and its work in a way that helps NSF expand beyond focusing on just the kind of R&D that it usually invests in to doing more to help support commercialization of R&D and bringing together the sort of ecosystems at the local level that allow industry, community colleges, universities, and local governments to really partner to help bridge that valley of death that often occurs and make sure that more of what is invented in America can actually be made in America. A second piece of this bill that Mike has laid out is its work to strengthen critical supply chains, which includes the work in the House side on the critical supply chain program. We, after the pandemic, I think nobody knew what a supply chain was, and now it's a kitchen table conversation. We have, as an administration, been very focused at trying to close supply chain vulnerabilities, but we need to get ahead of them as a country. And the provisions in the Bipartisan Innovation Act would allow the Commerce Department to both map and monitor supply chains so we can start understanding where our vulnerabilities are and get ahead and plan ahead for where vulnerabilities could hit. But importantly, it also creates a mechanism for the Commerce Department to invest in actually shoring up those vulnerabilities and allowing us to offer loans, grants, other financial incentives to companies to close those vulnerabilities. The bill will also really strengthen domestic manufacturing and our domestic manufacturing base. I don't have to tell this audience how important manufacturing is for American economic growth. It is a huge driver of R&D investment, especially by the private sector. It is like it is a huge engine of exports. 60% of our exports come from manufacturing, and the U.S. share of global manufacturing has fallen over the past 20, 30 years. The bill will do a few things in that regard. One, the Bipartisan Innovation Act will expand and strengthen the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which helps invest in the small and medium-sized enterprises that are really the heart of America's manufacturing industrial base. Over 40% of employment in manufacturing comes out of our small and medium-sized manufacturers, and this program helps them invest in workforce programs and technology upgrades and cybersecurity. It'll also lead to the expansion of our Manufacturing USA Institutes, the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes that really help develop industry-wide partnerships to support technological innovation in manufacturing. And that innovation is key to making American manufacturing globally competitive. Tied to all of this work on R&D and manufacturing is a big investment in semiconductor manufacturing and semiconductor R&D. Many of you may be familiar with semiconductors, the computer chips that power almost everything in our economy these days, whether we're talking cars, refrigerators, the grid, medical equipment, they're ubiquitous. And last year, a third of inflation was actually driven by the chip shortage and the global chip shortage and the impact it was having on the U.S. auto industry. Semiconductors are a technology that was invented in America, really expanded during the space race. And we used to account for 40% of global manufacturing, and now we're down to 10%. And we don't make the most innovative, the most leading edge chips anymore. With this legislation, we would change that trajectory. We would both invest in research and development, but also importantly, invest in actually bringing those manufacturing facilities back to the U.S. And expanding a number of semiconductor hubs around the country. Finally, what's really important to the work that we do here at the NEC that I oversee on supply chains and our industrial strategy is the work that this bill will do to support regional economic growth and regional economic development. Many of you are likely familiar with the fact that growth has been highly uneven in this country for the past 20 or so years. When you look especially at the innovation economy, half the jobs in high wage, high growth sectors were just in 41 counties in the past decade. And 90% of the growth in the technology and innovation sector happened in just 5 metropolitan regions. That is taking place in a country in which talent is not unequally divided, in which we have world-class universities all over the country as well. And so this legislation will support regional technology hubs and offer local and regional coalitions funding to support the growth of hubs in these technology areas of the future, whether it's advanced energy, EV cars, EV batteries, solar, but also quantum computing, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, all these kind of technologies that are poised to really transform the global economy. It will also, as Mike laid out on the House side, there is the Recompetes pilot. And then finally, at NSF, there is the National Science Foundation. There's a lot of funding for making sure that funding is getting to different universities at different levels and to the community colleges, so that workforce development programs can also get funded out of our community college system. So I will stop there with my review of the bill and just call your attention to how broadly this legislation is going to be really important at giving us the kind of tools that we need to outcompete China and the rest of the world, and will strengthen not just R&D in the U.S., but manufacturing in our supply chains in a way that helps us grow new jobs, new high-wage jobs, and lower costs for American families. So I'll close with that and turn it back over to Luke, or should I turn it to Chris directly?
I think either way, I can introduce Chris. Thank you, Sameera. And Chris, if you can hear us, hopefully. Just wanted to introduce you as the Deputy Director of the White House Office of Legislative Affairs. Chris is on the front lines with Congress and can maybe give us a in-depth state of play there. And also, if you can discuss ways counties should get involved in this conversation, I'm sure that would be valuable for the audience. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Luke. And thanks to Mike and to NACo for hosting today. Mike had alluded to this legislation's different names over the last year or so. And so it's truly pretty timely for us to be having this conversation this afternoon, because we're at a kind of major inflection point in this process in Congress that we've been part of for nearly a year. To recap on that briefly, it was about a little less than a year ago when legislation was introduced in the Congress called the Endless Frontier Act, which authorized a major investment in research and development, education and training, supply chains. This legislation was offered by Senator Todd Young of Indiana, Senator Schumer from New York, as well as Congressman Ro Khanna from Silicon Valley, and Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin. That legislation sort of evolved in the Senate over the course of a couple of months and really grew into a very comprehensive bill that the Senate passed back in early June with 69 votes. I think 18 or 19 Senate Republicans joined Democrats on it. There was a number of months where we kind of waited for the House to figure out how it wanted to approach sort of companion legislation. And late last year, the Speaker indicated that the House would take up similar legislation. And so through late last year and into early this year, they introduced and passed what's called the America Competes bill, which is also comprehensive, involves the work of several different committees in the House. They passed that legislation. And so we've been in this sort of holding pattern of awaiting the Senate and the House to sort of reconcile. And as you folks, I'm sure, cover Congress, like nothing happens too quickly. But this afternoon, conferees are being appointed. This is going to be a massive conference committee of more than 100 members just from the House alone. There will be about 26 senators, 13 Democrats, 13 Republicans. So those are being announced this afternoon. So it's a big step forward, hopefully, in getting to the part where they work out differences. And so we are spending this April recess, which Congress is about to begin, really beginning that process in earnest. I want to get back to the last point that Sameera made, which I think it's important to underscore. Much of this effort rests on the idea that talent and ideas are democratized across the whole country. I think that's why we've seen not just bipartisan support for this whole effort, but really a broad spectrum of the country is interested in it. Members are interested in it for different reasons, because I think it does recognize that there's been sort of uneven economic fortunes, that place does matter, and that strong programs are needed to, continue to nurture, cultivate new ideas, and unleash innovation. And so it's an important point, I think, to underscore. I think it's an important point to talk about with your member of Congress as well, which gets me to, where we could use your input, your feedback, and your time really talking with members of Congress during this period, explaining how this could be useful to your own efforts locally. I think that this is a great time to lift up your own stories, your own projects in counties and states that would benefit from this kind of investment. It is a time, I think, to meet with your member of Congress, to work with other partners in the region, to really explain the story of why a comprehensive approach to really reinvesting in our country's R&D infrastructure is really important for economic growth. It's also important for national security, as Sameera indicated. We could talk about all the supply chain vulnerabilities that would continue to persist without this type of legislation. And so, again, appreciate you all wanting to engage here. It is very timely in this process. Every big bill has its own sort of journey, and so this one is no different. But it is going to require, I think, an all hands on deck approach to help Congress sort of get to an outcome that we all want to see. So, with that, I can pass it back over to you, Luke, or to Mike, and again, we're happy to have a discussion.
Yeah, and I know we're at time, Mike, but if maybe we go an extra 5 minutes to allow a couple of questions, if that works for NACo.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a reminder, everyone, if you do have a question, please put them either in the chat or in the question and answer section of the function. While we wait for a question, if I may pose one myself, Chris, for you, since we don't see a lot of conference committees really anymore in Congress, I think the last one being 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, outside of the appropriations process, could you talk a little bit about generally the timeline once conferees are introduced, what the process is from that, getting it to the president's desk?
Sure, and you're right. And I think we'd really need to go back to see if there's been a conference of this sort of scope, really ever. But a couple of names to really throw out there, just for people to be aware of, like, who are some of the key conferees. So I mentioned there's a number of different committees. The main committees, I think, to be thinking about: Senate Commerce Committee, which is chaired by Maria Cantwell of Washington State. Her ranking member is Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi. Over in the House Science Committee is chaired by Edie Bernice Johnson of Texas, and ranking member is Frank Lucas from Oklahoma. They will be kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to the real bulk of the bill. A lot of the issues that Sameera is talking about kind of run through their committees. And so while this conference committee of 100 plus members will at some point, hopefully in late April, early May, get together for one meeting, which will probably be just a massive photo op, frankly. They won't be likely conducting a lot of business, but I think it'll just sort of start the process. Then we're going to see a lot of these committees kind of do their own work, what folks in Congress call like sort of the four corner kind of meetings and conversations. And it's a real, it's a negotiation through each of these committees, filtering back up to this conference committee. At a certain point in, a couple of weeks in, I think that people will begin to look at what's the sort of Venn diagram of policies in both the House and Senate bills that you see some solid agreement on. And I think the leadership, both Senate and House, Democrat, Republican leadership will at some point call the questions like, where are we right now? What's needed to close on these issues? The president needs to sign a bill. So we would expect that the administration will, be providing a lot of technical advice, but also have its own views about what is most important to see in a final product. And so it's just going to be probably pretty frenetic and a lot to keep up with. But those members who I mentioned are going to be ones that we would expect to be very central to the process, in addition to the leaders in House and Senate.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. I think the scope of this bill sometimes is hard to understand if you think about it, there's about 14 committees of jurisdiction for this one bill alone. Talking about that, the scope and size of this bill, one of the questions in the chat was, what is the total amount allocated? So what is the authorized funding levels within this proposal? And the second piece is a little more complicated, but they asked, what is the application process?
I can take some of those. Some of the authorized funding levels are over about 200 billion in authorized funding. Some of that breaks down into, for example, it's different on the House and the Senate side, but you have 45 billion on the House side for the supply chain program at the Department of Commerce. And then you have the semiconductor incentives are about 52 billion. The NSF funding is a little bit different across the two bills, but is somewhere in the $40 to $50 billion range that you're going to see there.
That's great. Thank you so much. We have another question. I'll kick that over to you, Sameera. It deals with the Recompetes Act. They asked, can you elaborate a little more on the brownfield opportunities? I know that was one of the allowable uses of funds within the Recompetes Act. So if you could just talk about the pilot program a little bit, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so the pilot program itself is going to broadly allow communities to, it will offer a funding allocation that is tied to certain economic indicators in your region, and that will allow you to develop your new kind of comprehensive plan to how you're going to shift your economy and really strengthen your employment picture in particular, and decrease your unemployment rate. And then it will offer you funding for supporting implementation of that economic development plan once you've developed it. It'll be very, very flexible in the uses of those dollars because it'll be tied to the plan that has been developed. And there will be efforts, I believe, to sort of measure the community's ability to actually meet and implement their plan so that when you get these grants, it's not kind of guaranteed fully for 10 years that you're going to get it. Communities have to hit certain metrics to continue to receive the funding, but it would offer kind of 10 years of funding, so you would have enough time and runway to implement your plan.
Thank you for that. And I think one of the big things about the Recompetes Act pilot program within this bill is the amount of TA that EDA will assist local governments, in our case counties, with throughout this process. So Chris, going back to you, I think they're going back to timing. And then I believe, I don't want to keep you guys any longer. This will probably be the last question we have. A couple of people were asking about timing in terms of dates when you guys predict the end of conference committee bill going to the president's desk. I know it's a very convoluted process, like you mentioned, but is there any sense of general timing?
So we want to move quick. Like I said up front, Congress has a way of slowing things down. If you look at the past, 15 months, some of my predictions as to when we would have gotten the big infrastructure bill done would have been way off from what I would have thought or hoped. So, I think the different benchmarks to look ahead to are, when Congress is up against a recess. That's Memorial Day. It's July 4th. I think that we will all be able to assess, what kind of progress is being made through the month of May. And so, I think as it relates to just your own planning and your own, advocacy, if you're doing that, I think that May is a really important month to really, be talking to your members of Congress. And frankly, like I said earlier, I think even using this April recess to talk with your members, ask how they're approaching it, figuring out how what's being proposed would help with your own economic development plans, your own sort of partnerships between universities and private sector. I think it would be a good time to just really get a good grasp of that. But again, we want to move as quickly as possible through this spring.
Can I add to that? I'd add, it's important when you're looking at how this bill would support you to also kind of underscore why now and why to act quickly is important. I mean, when I look at this and I look at the work that I've been doing for the past year and a half on supply chain resilience, on managing this economic recovery, it is clear that we need to act quickly to shore up these vulnerabilities because they are leading to a drag on our economic growth. Last year, we had 1% shaved off of GDP because of the chip shortage. And when you look around the world at other countries, they're acting fast. So China has invested over $150 billion to increase its domestic production of semiconductors. The EU and Japan, they're moving to do the same. So if we don't act quickly, we are at risk of these technologies moving offshore and further growing, these technology ecosystems growing further offshore. So I hope that as you look at the economic development plans that you're making for your region, you're able to underscore how time is of the essence here. And this is the moment when we have an opportunity, an incredible opportunity to build back American competitiveness, especially at a time when our economy is a little bit ahead of others in the way that we're well positioned coming out of the COVID pandemic because of the supports from the American Rescue Plan. We're a little bit stronger than others, and we need to capitalize on that strength and use it to further leapfrog and jump ahead of other places if we act now and act quickly.
That's a great point. Thank you so much. Before turning it back over to Luke for some last words, I just want to thank you three again for taking the time to join us today. As always, we really appreciate the insight that you provided and continue to look forward to our partnership together as we continue to advocate for and advance policies that help create healthy, safe, and vibrant communities around the country. So Luke, any last words?
Thanks, Mike. And yeah, we've already kept folks a little late, but hopefully you found the conversation valuable. I'll just say, if you have any questions about any of this, we are ready to answer them. So you can work with Mike or directly with me, send them in, and we'll make sure you get answers. If you think, as we hope you do, that there needs to be action, there needs to be action quickly, we really value your voice. As Chris said, though maybe infrastructure bill didn't get done on the timeline we had aimed for, we did get it done, and in large part, that was because of the voice of counties kind of lifting up what was important, what was resonating. And so it's the same here. We really value county electeds, your teams, kind of talking about what this would mean for your communities. So please work with your partners as has been discussed on your advocacy, and then also issue statements, use your social media channels where relevant. And when you do, please share them with us so we can make sure they get more attention. So that's all I've got. Thank you again, Sameera and Chris, for joining us here with the counties today. And Mike, we will say goodbye.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.